Hi guys, hi, how's it going? How you doing today? Hopefully today finds you well. Today I am doing a video I've done a couple times on my channel now, but I like coming back and doing this, multiple times or over and over, like maybe year over year, because things change. It's all about my palettes. And this was something made popular. It was a tag video made popular by Samantha March and Allie Glines. And then they did a round 2 of it in 2022. I did it in 2020 when it first came out, and I did it in 2022, a new rendition of it, and I'm doing it again today, combining both the first All About My Palettes eyeshadow tag and the second All About My Palettes eyeshadow tag. There were some prompts that were a little bit like, duplicating each other, so in a roundabout way. So I did take those ones out, but I'm so excited to go over this with you, and I hope that you are too. I love talking about eyeshadows because for those of you new here, hi, my name is Donna. I am a lover of all things high-end, colorful beauty and self-care. I also work in the beauty industry as a field leader for Ulta Beauty. I get a lot of education in my position. I like to bring you that education here on my channel, but ultimately I'm just out here talking about makeup because I really love to talk about makeup, and I'm assuming if you're here, at the very least, you love listening to somebody talk about makeup, but you probably also like to talk about makeup yourself. So I hope that you find that this channel soothes your soul in the way it soothes mine, and that you'll want to subscribe before you go. With that said, if you are interested in the All About My Eyeshadow Palettes tag by Samantha March and Allie Glines, done for the third time on my channel in a different year, then I would love to have you just keep on watching. So these are really quick, really great prompts. It's a really amazing video to do. I don't have to elaborate too much on any of these things. I am a chatty channel. If you're not new around here, you know that, but I'm going to try and keep this real tight and condensed for your viewing pleasure. With that said, let's roll into the first prompt, which is newest palette. I had to go back and look at my newest palette because I couldn't remember which one I purchased last, because I purchased both of these on Valentine's Day because they both launched on Valentine's Day. But my newest palettes are the Onsai Perfect World collection, which I will have a review of that linked up in the cards. You've seen it very recently. And the Glamlight Chucky collab. Now this is not even out of its box because I haven't even used it yet, but this is the palette, and it's kind of scary, right? But it's the Crazy in Love palette in collaboration with Chucky and Glamlight, and this is what the palette looks like. I just think it really speaks to me in a way that is unlike any other palette in my collection. It's very unique to my collection, and I think it would be unique to anybody's collection. So when it launched, I had to have it. I didn't want the whole collection, but I did purchase this and the Chucky lip set with the lip liner and the lipstick for Chucky, not Tiff, his girlfriend, but this is my newest palette. Now, my oldest one has been on my channel 100,000 times. I love this palette so much, and this is the catalyst for my YouTube channel here, and that is the Urban Decay Electric palette. This, I really do believe, is the oldest palette that I still have in my collection. This is the palette that I purchased that my husband said, "You just like to buy pretty things that you'll never use, don't you?" And I showed him because I used it every day for like a month and a half. And then didn't wear anything else. And I believe that this is why I have like the crazy color fascination that I do with my eye makeup, because this is what I knew about eye makeup, because prior to this palette, I hadn't worn eye makeup ever. Okay, maybe a couple times in my life, and then wore this every single day for like a month and a half. So oldest palette in my collection. It's gotten to the point where I'm like, should I still be putting that on my eyeballs? Maybe, maybe not. The next prompt is most money. So these are the most expensive palettes in my collection, and if you've been around, you probably know, but they are the Natasha Denona green brown and purple blue. They will probably forever be the most expensive palettes in my lineup because they are $239 a piece. But I did buy both of them in a bundle from the Natasha Denona website, and I did get them both for about the price of one and a half of these. I think it was like $310 for both of them. One of them, the green brown, was my favorite palette of last year. That is another prompt in this, but I decided to pull in my number 2 favorite from last year as a favorite from last year for that prompt instead, because this definitely is the most expensive palette in my collection. I had to show both of them because there's no difference in price. They were the absolute same. I would say I love the green or the purple blue as well. Obviously it is the more colorful of the two, but the green brown I just had a whole lot more fun playing with, to be honest. And I feel like the looks I got from that one were a little bit more cohesive than the other one. So not that I like either one of them differently. It is old school Natasha Denona formula. So the formula is quite different from her newer palettes, but just such a beautiful, beautiful eyeshadow look that you're getting using those palettes. And then the next prompt is least expensive, and that would have to be ColourPop. I was actually pretty surprised that this is the least expensive palette in my collection, because I really thought I had more inexpensive palettes than this, but I'm kind of a bougie girl. I mean, if you can't tell, just in the 4 palettes that have already been over, I don't really love drugstore. ColourPop is kind of like bare minimum of my expectations for an eyeshadow formulation, I guess. They are very hit and miss in my humble opinion. But this palette I loved from them. This is the Baroque eyeshadow palette, and you can't get this one anymore, but it is just so beautiful. Again, kind of that grayscale look to it. It leans a little bit burgundy. It's very, very pretty. I do believe that this palette was like $14, but that is the most least expensive palette that I have in my collection. Last year in this video, I talked about the e.l.f. Bite Size palettes, but I decluttered every single one of those because I just did not love them. I know that they're all hyped out here on the platform, but I didn't love them. The next one is smallest, and so I thought about going with like quads and stuff like that, but I really do believe that these are probably the smallest eyeshadow palettes that I have in my collection. They're quints. They're Natasha Denona quints, but they're little tiny and barely take up any space at all, whereas I do see like some of the quads that I have in my collection are quite a bit bigger. The shadows are smaller, but the packaging is quite a bit bigger. So these are probably the smallest ones I have in my collection, and they are the Natasha Denona quints. And then the next prompt is largest, and I did pull 2 palettes because both of these are the same size. You can see they're not largest in terms of how many shadows are in each one, because I think there is 32 shadows in each one of these, and I do have an eyeshadow palette that has 40 shadows that would be bigger in terms of how many shadows it's got in it, but these are gigantor. These are so big, and I kept, even though Morphe is not my favorite formula, I do have quite a bit of Morphe in my collection. I kept the James Charles one just because it's got such a wonderful like rainbow color story to it. Not that it's my favorite, because none of Morphe is my favorite at all. But then I also kept this one, which is the Such a Gem, because I had the most amount of fun with this palette that I have ever had with a Morphe palette. I found that all of the shades in this worked really, really well with each other, with other shadows as well. These center shadows are kind of like a putty formula, almost like a Super Shock, but maybe a little bit more creamy. They were just so, so beautiful, and I had so much fun with this palette. So that's the reason why I kept this. But both of these are the same size, and they would have to be my largest palettes by sheer largeness, not number of eyeshadows. So the next prompt was worth the hype, and I pulled out the Patrick Ta Major Dimension 2 eyeshadow palette. I have the Major Dimension 2, which is the rosy colored one. He also has Major Dimension eyeshadow palette, the Major Dimension one, which is more browns. I think either way you go, like, look, these are fantastic palettes. I would never have thought that just a really monotone eyeshadow palette would be a worth the hype kind of palette, but it really is. These shimmers in and of themselves, I would purchase singles of these shimmers. They are so pretty, so impactful. And these cream eyeshadows, honestly, that are on the end of both of his palettes have cream eyeshadows. They are so good and they last so long, and that palette is just worth the hype. Do I think it's still super expensive for worth the hype? Absolutely. But I think it's worth it, to be honest. The not worth the hype product that I picked was Charlotte Tilbury. I have one quad from Charlotte Tilbury, and look, I like Charlotte Tilbury face products. I love her bronzers. I love her powders. I love a lot from Charlotte Tilbury. I don't love the eyeshadows. I think the eyeshadows are not where it's at as it pertains to Charlotte Tilbury. Also, this little quad is only about $10 cheaper than this eyeshadow palette here that has, what, 12 shades in it? Yeah, 12 shades. Why? Why is that the case? This definitely does not hold a candle to this. So really, kick in the extra couple bucks and get the Patrick Ta palette if you're thinking about a Charlotte Tilbury quad. It's just not worth it, and I will never spend the $75 that she wants on a full-size eyeshadow palette, just knowing what I went through with the quad. It's not horrible, but it's definitely not worth it. I've got better mattes and better shimmers in my collection everywhere, not just in that Patrick Ta palette, including drugstores that shows up much better than those two. So then the next prompt is fave from a fave brand. I have the Natasha Retro palette. This Retro palette is actually a new fave for me. When this one came out, my favorite at the time, I think, was the Natasha Denona Metropolis palette, or maybe even the gold. Listen, this is probably, like, she came out with my dream palette. That's her dream palette, right? It's the perfect palette for her. This is probably my dream palette. I think that this palette is stunning, and the burgundies in here, and you know, pinks and the purples, oh my god, just so pretty. The shimmers in here are beautiful. The mauves in here are beautiful. I feel like you can get a little bit of everything. You can get kind of a warmer tone look. You can definitely get kind of a cooler tone look if you mix and match just right. I definitely love this palette. I think it's probably my perfect aesthetic as far as palettes go, so definitely a favorite, and she is my favorite brand. And then most used, so I pulled two because I don't track how many times I use my palettes, but I think this one was my most used in my video last year. But when I think about it, I think both of these could be most used. This is the Tarte's Pro palette, and I've used this so many times that you can't see Tarte on, except for like a couple of eyeshadows in here. You can't see that anymore. And then all of these shimmers really have a good dip on them. This is one of my first eyeshadow palettes that I ever purchased as well. But then also Modern Renaissance. Like, look at this palette. You can see it's just been used and abused. There are quite a few shades in there with dips. The palette is just messy. I don't know which one I've used the most, but I know both of these have been used quite a substantial number of times. Then I have all-time fave. So an all-time fave for me, and I think this might surprise people, is the KVD Center. And the reason why this is an all-time fave for me is, number one, the packaging is just gorgeous. This is one of the first, like, what I would consider at that time luxury eyeshadow palettes that I purchased, because at the time that I purchased this, it was $68. It was brand new. I had never spent that amount of money on an eyeshadow palette before, and this is what it looks like. It's got beautiful light tones, beautiful deep tones, beautiful colors, beautiful shimmers. It's just such an everyday all-around eyeshadow palette for me, and you can just get a myriad of looks, right? The variety in this palette has always been something that I think is glorious about the palette. Not to mention the formulation of these shadows is really good. Like, this is when KVD was Kat Von D, and you know, I used it quite an extensive amount of times, and then kind of had to shuffle it away because she was canceled and I couldn't bring it out on my channel anymore. But man, I just love this palette. It is probably one of, it's a palette that I won't ever get rid of just because I love it so much. And then a new fave is got to be the Blend Bunny Dollhouse palette. You guys, I had such a great time while I was utilizing this palette for my palette roulette series. And what I would say is that this has light tones, it has dark tones, it has cools, it has warms, has beautiful impactful shimmers. There was only like one dud in the palette that I could pinpoint, but even then I'm not sure it was a dud. I think it was about the stupid primer that I was using with this palette. You get really colorful looks from this, but you also get really everyday muted eye looks from this. And when I did the palette roulette on this, I was like, if you haven't tried this, you're missing out, because you absolutely are. This is such a beautiful eyeshadow formula. I mean, just the blendability of it, it's like magic in an eyeshadow palette. I loved this eyeshadow palette, and I have 2 more eyeshadow palettes from Blend Bunny that I haven't tried that I can't wait to put into my palette roulette, because I know I'm gonna love them just the same. And they have quite a wee bit different of an eyeshadow color story, so really super excited about that. The next prompt is not a fave, but you keep it anyway. Look, this has outlived so many declutters, and the biggest reason why is because of these 6 like baked middle shades that are stunning. They remind me, this is by Becca, by the way. This is the Shimmering Glow eyeshadow palette, or some stupid something name. I can't even remember what it's called. You can't get it anymore, and I do think that I picked it up from TJ Maxx. The mattes on either side are horrible. They are awful. But these shimmers remind me of an eyeshadow version of the Becca Shimmering Skin Perfectors, and they are beautiful, impactful, no exacerbation of texture, just no creasing, beautiful eyeshadows. And that is why I keep this palette. It has lived and outlived every single declutter I have done because of those 6 shades. And yes, I will keep it for those 6 shades because I love those 6 shades enough. Then I have a most underrated palette, and I think that this was the same as what I said in last year's video, and it is the Winky Lux Kitten palette. This could have been one of the most used palettes if I had brought this in earlier, like much around the modern Renaissance time frame. This came in from a BoxyCharm. I did get it in a BoxyCharm, and I know that it's got a bad rap out on the YouTube space. Like, there are several different reviews of this palette that just say that it's the worst palette out there. I don't experience that with this palette. I have such a good time with this palette. Every eye look I've come up with this palette has been beautiful. This pink is a beautiful pink. This duochrome, beautiful duochrome. This is probably the best burgundy shade I have in my collection. This blue is very unique. It's kind of got like this shimmeriness to it, but it's like this really gray toned slatey blue. It's just so pretty. I love this palette. I think it's probably the most underrated palette on the market, let alone underrated in my collection. And then Surprised Me. This was a palette that I reviewed with a bunch of other quads, and this one really shocked me because my aunt got it for me at Walmart. And again, I'll go back to just a few minutes ago when I said I'm kind of a bougie bee. I don't really dabble in drugstore all that often, but when I looked at this on the company's website, the Reina Ribalde website, it's actually like a $20 quad, which doesn't mean much to me. It really doesn't. What means much to me is the fact that this came from Walmart, and it is blue, and I thought it was going to be poop, and these are probably my favorite blues in my palette collection. Like, this navy blue is so good. This periwinkle kind of has a little bit of a shifty sheeniness to it. It is so beautiful. This like cornflower blue, beautiful. No skipping, no voiding, no patchiness, nothing. Like, I experienced nothing but greatness with this little tiny blue quad. It really did surprise me. I thought it was going to be awful, and it just wasn't. I don't 100% love the packaging. There's no like clasp on it or anything. I mean, I think they're supposed to be, but it doesn't work. Maybe it's just packaging that I have, but I love that, and it surprised me. So there are really expensive quads that have left my palette collection, and that one will remain because I just love those blues. They're just so good. So the next one is Fave Collab, and my Fave Collab still remains, even though I love the Perfect World collab, don't get me wrong, but this one has to be my favorite collab because number one, it introduced me to Kaleidos, which I think is one of my favorite eyeshadow formulas, and number two, it's by Angie, and Angie is probably a YouTuber that I've been watching the longest. She's a YouTuber that I never miss an upload from. Even her vlogs, I watch her vlogs. This is the Club Nebula palette with Kaleidos. The other reason why this has to go down as what my favorite collab is because of the really deep dark mattes in here. Like, I love deep dark mattes. You guys can see deep dark mattes in my eyeshadow look today. I love a dark moody eyeshadow, and this gives me dark moody eyeshadow, but it's also got like this crazy chartreusey green, which I also love, and this beautiful teal blue matte that I also love. I love that it's got more mattes than it does shimmers, but I also love that the shimmers are so impactful and beautiful and go with every single one of the eyeshadows in here. So this would have to go down and will continue to go down as my favorite collab. The next one is my 2022 favorite, and like I said a minute ago, my 2022 favorite palette that I tried in 2022 was the Natasha Denona Green Brown, but because that was part of another prompt, I am pulling in the Melt Gemini. I, again, don't know where I was when this first came out. I remember seeing it when it first came out, and I remember saying I need to pick up that palette, but then at that point in time, Melt is really expensive, and Melt, I just wasn't going to spend $58 on a 10-pan eyeshadow palette, and I don't feel that way anymore. so I picked it up, and this was my number 2 palette for 2022. The sheer amount of beautiful grungy eye looks that you can get out of this is, I mean, there's such a variety of eye looks that you can get out of this that are not grungy also, but every single look I did with this palette, I absolutely loved. And every single look I did with this palette, I got compliments on. So I love that it has a black. I love that it has a really, a really beautiful, like, kind of, orangey gold shimmer over here, and it has a beautiful, like, kind of like chartreusey olive shimmer over here, and everything else in here is matte. I do like me mattes. Such a beautiful palette. I just really had a great time with it, and like I said, the variety of grungy eye looks that you can get, but also the variety of, regular everyday eye looks that you can get with it. Green is also my favorite color again, so there's that. I just had a really good time with it. So it was my number 2 palette for 2022. The next one is Sparks Joy, and this one has to be the one that sparks joy for me because every time I pull it out to use it, I'm like, ooh, what can I do with this? It is beautiful. It is neon. It is not neon. It is so gorgeous. It has the perfect amount of shimmer to mattes ratio in my humble opinion. The shimmers go with every single color in here. The neons are just super impactful and beautiful. Like, the mattes blend beautifully. The shimmers top beautifully. Like, this is a palette that sparks so much joy for me, and this was my number 1 palette of 2021. The next prompt is first palette you purchased this year. So technically I purchased this, right? Because I brought it in a Beautylish lucky bag. So I'm going to count it as the first one I purchased this year. Otherwise, the first ones that I purchased this year would have been the Perfect World collection and the Glamlight Chucky palette, right? So, which I already talked about. But this one was the first one that came into my collection this year. I purchased it in my Beautylish lucky bag in the day after Christmas 2021 or 2022, but it came to me in January 2023, and that would be the Danessa Myricks Lightwork Volume 4 Transcendence palette. This is the newest, the first one that I got in my collection this year. It is still in its box. I have not used it. I really need to because, I mean, what? This is so, so freaking pretty. Like, who doesn't love a great, like, multi-chrome? This is also a really expensive palette, so I was super, super excited to get it in my lucky bag. But I need to put this on my face. I just don't have the time that this will take to, you know, finagle in the mornings. I definitely need to use it. I will definitely do like a palette roulette on it sometime very, very soon. But that is the newest one, or the first one that came into my collection this year. And then I have 3 more prompts: everyday, most colorful, and nostalgic. The first one is everyday. For me, I have the Too Faced Natural Nudes palette as my everyday palette. This is, I mean, really a palette that also shocked me because I am not a Too Faced fan, but I love this palette. The mattes are perfect, and I love that the mattes are the bigger pans. The shimmers are beautiful, and you could get just a almost one and done eyeshadow look. It just going row by row. You can get really light, you can get really deep. It has some cooler tones, it has some warmer tones. I mean, this is just a perfect everyday eyeshadow palette in my humble opinion, and I could pick it up every day and wear it. I would get bored because it's browns, but and I'm just a color queen, but that is the perfect, if I was into neutrals, that would be the only palette that I would ever need. The next one is most colorful, and I had to go with this one even though I have lots of colorful eyeshadow palettes, because this one I just feel like encompasses, like when I think of a Skittles rainbow, this is what I think of, is this palette here. I think that this just truly embodies colorful, and that's why I pulled this one. Now I have the, you know, Glamlight Paint palette, the Glamlight Paint Pro palette. I have the Stacey Marie Color or Carnival 3 palette. Those are super colorful as well. But I definitely think that this one is just straight up color. There's not a whole lot of neutral in here, right? There is, but there isn't really. And the first thing you see in this palette is all the color. And it's not that that is not the case for the like Paint or Paint Pro, but I definitely feel like this one is probably more colorful than those ones are. It's definitely, I feel like, more pigmented than those ones are. And I also feel like this one is, as far as colorful palettes go, a much easier product to use than those Paint and Paint Pro palettes. I love this palette. This palette will go nowhere ever, and it would probably, I would say this is my most colorful in my collection. The last prompt is nostalgic, and for me it would have to be the ColourPop My Little Pony palette. So My Little Pony palette is nostalgic for me, not because of the color story, because there's nothing really special about this color story, even though some of these shades are really fantastic, but it is the My Little Pony part of this. Like, it's not about memories that I've had since having this palette, it's about the memories that it creates with me, just owning it and looking at it from when I was a little girl. Like, My Little Ponies were the shit. It was what I wanted, and it was, I had like 40 of them. And when I think about this palette, I also think about my friend Rachel, who worked for me at Starbucks when I worked there, and she has a My Little Pony collection. It makes me think of my friend Bonnie, who also has My Little Pony collection. All of us are around the same age. We all had the same like infatuation and obsession with My Little Pony, and that is what this palette does for me. There are, you know, I have like Hello Kitty is a thing of my past too, but I don't really have and haven't used any of the Hello Kitty products in my collection or palettes in my collection, but this one definitely brings up that substantial amount of nostalgia for me every time I pick it up, every time I look at it even. And when I am doing a declutter, I'm like, nope, that can't go anywhere because I love My Little Pony. But also, they're really great. Like, I love, this has got some really great eyeshadows in it also. Like, these 3 shades here make a killer eye look. With that said, that's it. That's all about my eyeshadow palettes. How you guys feel about this video? I loved pulling all the palettes for this. I hope that you loved going through all these palettes with me. What do you think about my choices? What would your choices be? I would be interested to hear from you down in the comments section. Don't forget to hit me up down there. I still respond to every single one of my comments, and I would love to have a conversation with you down there. But with that said, that's it. That's all I have for you guys. So thank you so much for coming today. I hope that you and yours are safe and healthy, and the month is treating you kindly, and you're getting along as best you can, and you are loving each other as much as you absolutely can. And until next time, friends, bye.